Since the early 1980s, Nick Lunn has had a passion for one of the largest mammals on Earth, the polar bear. He's trying to understand the environmental factors which are threatening this symbol of the Great White North of Canada.
I often refer to myself as a polar bear historian. That my legacy will be one of the few people to document a population that eventually is, petering out, so to speak. But at the same time, I take a great deal of satisfaction that the research that has been done here and is continuing here has really got a message out that, hey, climate change is happening, and it's not just we're losing sea ice, who cares? We're now getting to something that, people care about. They care about polar bears, and they don't want to see polar bears disappear because of things that mankind might be doing. I've been really interested in, the environment in nature ever since a small boy. And one of the things I like to do is just go at dusk and look for animals. At the time, they happened to be deer and elk and stuff, so it wasn't polar bears at the time. But it's from an early age, I've just really been interested in the outdoors. So I can't really put a finger on when or what was the key thing. It's just something I've always been interested in from a young age.
In 1981, Nick Lunn, then a student at the University of Alberta, found a summer job as assistant to biologist Dr. Ian Stirling, which took him to Churchill in Manitoba, known as the world capital of polar bears. Ever since, twice a year, Nick leaves his family behind for a period of 4 to 6 weeks and goes into the field to document the behavior of the white kings.
Churchill is the area that I conduct my field work. The western Hudson Bay polar bear population comes ashore there during the summer. I come up to Churchill twice a year in the fall time, August, September, when the entire population is ashore. And I'm up here in Churchill again in February, March, when the pregnant females are now leaving the dens with their new cubs.
When the sea ice melts at the beginning of the summer, the bears move into terra firma to wait for the new ice. There are 19 populations of polar bears worldwide, of which 13 are in Canada. Located on the shores of the Hudson Bay, Churchill is home to the western Hudson Bay population of polar bears.
You want a coffee? I need more coffee, so...
So how have the last few days been going?
Well, that's that, right? Why do they have to...
During his time in Churchill, Nick is based at the Northern Studies Centre. That's where he met Karen Jolicoeur, a young guide interpreter in Wapusk National Park. It's a job that allows her to combine her passion for wildlife with passing on her knowledge to visitors to the park.
Here, the researchers have a lot of information. Sometimes it's very technical, but by chatting with people like Nick and reading their reports, I can look at that information and find a simpler way of sharing it with the public. And people are definitely interested. They want to know the number of bears in the population. Are they in good health? Are they in decline? All sorts of information like that. If I know it, it's because I've got it from research like Nick's. In autumn, the females dig their dens in the peatland, and they often look for areas close to a lake or a river. So they want to dig horizontally into the peat. They look for an orientation so that the snow will cover the hole and really create a good level of insulation, and also the chance of enlarging the den once there's a big snowdrift. Around December, January, the cubs are born. They are very, very tiny and will stay there until the beginning of March, usually. That's when the warmer weather comes and the mother decides to take her tiny cubs out to show them their new world for the first time.
Hey, Bela. Good to see you. Yeah, good to see you.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, good flight?
Yeah,
Yeah?
it was actually very good.
Oh,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
Bella Baliko has been Nick Lunn's assistant since 1999. In addition to helping him with capturing bears, Bella also acts as photographer. Nick entrusts the illustration of his research to him.
Initially, he invited me up as a photographer. In the first couple years, I was pretty much just a photographer. I do many different books and calendars. And right from the very start, I was more than happy to get my hands dirty, get in there and start working on the animals. That, of course, each year that I had worked with him, I just gained more and more experience until eventually I knew all the procedural work very, very well, and I very much became his assistant as well as a photographer.
Over the next few weeks, Nick and Bella will fly over the region by helicopter, looking for polar bears. At this time of year, cold weather, strong winds, and reduced visibility can sometimes keep them on the ground for several days. Each year, Nick asks himself the same question: will the meteorological conditions allow him to fly? Today, the weather is favourable, and it will be possible to fly. Nick and Bella will fly over Wappas National Park, looking for females that have left their dens to return to the sea ice where the males have spent the winter.
Well, Karen, hopefully we have a good day. And,
Yeah, I wish you a good day anyways.
Oh, thank you.
I'll open the door for you guys.
Thanks very much. And we'll
La banquise, la glace.
The sea ice, the ice on the Hudson Bay, is the real natural habitat for polar bears. When the ice melts, the bears are forced to come onto the land, so the males stay close to the coast. The females often go a bit further inland for several reasons, but one of the main ones is to get away from the males, because the big males could prey on the cubs.
Être prédateur des petits.
Now, if a female is pregnant, she will go further inland and go into the peatlands. She'll dig her den in the autumn into the peat and stay there until early March. That's the time the mother will decide to go back to the sea ice, onto the ice.
The research area extends over several hundred square kilometres. Spotting a white bear in a snowy landscape is not an easy task.
Yeah, they're right here.
Okay, just look at this little clearing here, Nick, right below
Yeah,
you.
they're right here.
As soon as the mother is asleep, Nick can approach the cubs and anaesthetize them. He can now proceed with his data collection. Since 1983, Nick has been compiling information on the western Hudson Bay polar bear population in a database which is unique in the world.
Hi. You guys look kind of big today. You look like the biggest cubs we might have caught. We take a variety of samples and measurements, and we do those year in and year out, which allow us to make comparisons over time, not only from bears in a particular year, but between individual over time. So a bear we catch in the 80s, if we catch it now, we can look at, say, contaminant levels. Are they going up? Are they going down? Are they the same? What did you say?
25.
You're miles off. 30.5.
Holy cow.
30 pounds for one of the twins, that's pretty heavy. I mean, I think the heaviest one I can remember catching was 35 pounds. These are good-sized cubs, considering the ones we've caught so far being 17, 18, 20, 22. I mean, these ones almost 10 pounds heavier. It wasn't really until the early 1990s that some of the measures that we just tended to record that we noticed there were changes in them. And we really couldn't put our finger on what was causing them, but things such as the condition of bears was declining. They were getting a little bit lighter. You know, nothing too alarming, but it was something that was consistent.
At that time, Nick tried to find out if the ringed seals, the polar bear's main source of food, were present in sufficient numbers in the Hudson Bay. After a lot of research, it seemed clear that the bear's weight loss was not due to the quantity of food available.
It was also about that time as well that Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines erupted, and that was in 1991. And the net effect was cooling throughout the Arctic in 1992. And we noticed that in that year, the bears came ashore in really good shape. They had lots of fat on them, and you know, the weights had gone up. So all of a sudden our data showed a little blip where things improved all of a sudden.
These results led Nick to suspect changes in the climate. But what effect does warming have on the environment? Is it possible that the ice fields are affected? These questions remained unanswered for many years.
It's nice to see that there's still bears that are in really good shape coming out of the denning area in March and have nice, big, fat cubs. Unfortunately, these used to be the norm back in the 80s and so in early 90s, and now they're more of a rarity. So it's nice that they're still capable of doing it. It is like a Twilight Zone day. Nice weather, warm, nice female in really good shape.
Well, today's forecast, we're definitely not going to be flying today because of wind chills and visibility. The following day and the days after look possible, but we can keep our fingers crossed.
It's impossible to fly today. Nick takes the opportunity to talk with other researchers who have come from all over the world to study life in the north.
People at dinner time or having a coffee, you know, people will ask one another what they're doing or what they were finding. Polar bears are megafauna. People are quite taken by polar bears. So I get asked a lot of questions about polar bears and stuff like that.
At these quieter times, Nick feels a long way away from his family. As a father of 2 young children, he tries to talk to them as often as possible.
Good evening, study center. If I know my wife and kids are at home, I will do my best to call every night. And to me, that's important. My kids are young. I mean, it's important for them to talk to me and know that I care. And so it's a very important part of my day is being able to talk to my family at night. Yeah. Love you very much, Jeremy. Bye-bye.
Outside, the blizzard is still raging. Time is short. Nick only has about 30 days to collect his precious data. After that period, the females will have returned to the sea ice and the team will no longer be able to capture them. After a stormy night, the sun is shining on the community of Churchill. Nick and his team will be able to continue his search for females and their young. At this time of year, the residents of Churchill go about their business without worrying too much about meeting polar bears. The situation is different in summer, when the ice melts and the bears return to the shore. The conservation officers have to take care that the polar bears don't come too close to the houses.
The conservation officers take great care not to let the bears come into the village. They're constantly patrolling around. And if there are any bears in the region, they try to scare them before they come into the village where people are walking around. So we very rarely get bears in the village itself, but a lot of bears walk around the outside.
In order to protect the citizens of Churchill, as well as the polar bears, the government of Manitoba set up the Polar Bear Alert Program in the 1980s.
The Polar Bear Alert Program in the Churchill area is to protect life and property of people within the control zone. Secondly, it's to protect the polar bears so that they're not unwarranted kills or demise of the polar bears. And a third function that's equally important of the program is that they don't become food conditioned, like going into the dump.
In spite of the dump closing in 2005, conservation officers occasionally have to intervene to relocate animals which come too close to the village. The bears are captured and taken with great care by helicopter to places away from the inhabited areas.
We still have the same amount of bears around as we did in 2005, but we don't have the problem bears because we've reduced our area that we're actioning. We've lost, probably, 50 to 60 bears that we don't have to handle anymore.
Since the beginning of the day, Nick's team has been flying around looking for polar bears. They have at last found a female. But something unexpected happens. Usually during these captures, the cubs stay with their mother. But this time, the youngster has hidden in a thicket nearby, which makes Nick's task much more complicated.
Nick's preoccupied with keeping the cubs' attention on him, and I'm going to sneak in behind with the noise of the helicopter. The cub won't hear me, and I'll be able to put the lasso around his neck, capture him. As soon as we do that, Nick will give it a shot of drug just to calm it down. And that way we can carry it on over to its mother and begin processing the family group.
Whew. It is a bit of a workout. One of our concerns with the decline in condition of bears is that females are in too poor condition and they run out of resources and can't provide for their cubs. We're seeing a decrease in cub litter size, in cub weights, cub survival, and one of the thoughts is that they may be running out of fat reserves to produce milk for the cubs, so we always like to check if at this point when we catch them whether they're lactating or not, and she is, so she's still got some reserves anyway for her cub, and hopefully they'll make it out onto the sea ice.
For Nick Lunn, it's clear that global warming is directly affecting polar bears, which need the sea ice to feed and to reproduce. The females have less time to build up the fat that's vital for their survival and that of their cubs.
Polar bears are, a lot of people refer to them as the canary in the coal mine, which they are. They're a ketone species. They're top of the food chain. There are lots of other species at lower levels, such as ring seals, Arctic cod, zooplankton, that are all dependent on sea ice as part of that ecosystem. So what we're seeing in changes in polar bears is by no means an isolated thing that we can say, okay, polar bears, so what? We're looking at an entire Arctic marine ecosystem that is impacted by warming climate.
In the last decade, we've seen a decline in polar bears. The population was over 1,200, and now we find about 900 individuals. So that's a bit of a red light right there. We can see there may be a problem, and Nick Lunn, with his long-term research, is able to tell us what the hypotheses are, why there is this decline.
A lot of the research we've done in the last year and a half or so is really being geared towards impact on population size. And we've just finished that analysis that's just been published. One of the key things that came out as being important was the survival of cubs, independent juveniles, and the survival of the really old age bears had a direct link to the date of sea ice breakup. The earlier the breakup, the reduced rates of survivals that those three groups had. And so that was probably the key finding, is that there is actually a link to a decline in the population linked to earlier and earlier sea ice breakup.
The work that I do, photographically speaking, is of great importance because really what I feel that I'm doing now is I'm documenting the extinction of a species. And that's just on the changes that we've seen over the last few years. I look at these animals and I realize that the majority of these smaller cubs certainly won't make it to the sea ice, and most undoubtedly they won't make it through their first year out on the sea ice. So I'm photographing these animals, and I know fully well that many of them I'll never see again. And it's really heartbreaking when you see that.
Flying over the sea ice, the team sees a mother with her cubs. Nick is happy that this family reached its destination. Unfortunately, there are more doubts than ever over the long-term survival of the polar bear.
Without sea ice, you don't have polar bears. So at some point in time, if all the projections that the climate modelers and forecasters are telling us, these things continue, we're going to have less and less and less sea ice. And at some point, that will be a critical issue for polar bears. Will there be polar bears here during my career? That's an unknown.